Hi, I'm Paul Kolin. I'm president of the Bloomfield Hills School Board, and I'm also a member of the International Academy Task Force. Today we're going to be giving you sort of an education on a lot of what has happened in the past, sort of the history of the International Academy, and we're going to talk about governance in the past and hopefully governance in the future. Myself and my colleague here, Carol, who's going to introduce herself in a second, we're part of this International Academy Task Force, and we're going to be focusing on governance.
Hi, I'm Carol Finkelstein. I'm a Board of Education member in one of the 13 consortium districts. And I'm going to walk you through our presentation on the International Academy. If you have questions about any of the slides, slide numbers are up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen so that you could reach out to us with any questions that you might have. Why are we here? Your district is a member of the consortium that operates the International Academy. We want to share some wonderful things about the school. However, many consortium board members know very little about the International Academy. Since joining the consortium, has your board regularly received reports about the IA, including Joint Steering Committee meeting minutes? We're going to have a board member to board member discussion with you. We want to educate you on the governance structure of the International Academy, specifically what's working and what isn't working. And we're going to ask that your board take steps that will ensure continued success of this wonderful school. The IA Task Force was formed earlier this year following communications from the MSU First Amendment Law Clinic to every consortium board member. There have also been questions raised in the community about the governance of the school early this year. The task force met for the first time on February 19th. It included board members from some of the consortium districts as well as a couple of superintendents. The participants agreed at this meeting that an independent attorney and firm is needed to represent the consortium, and any concerns related to any IA staff member should be addressed by the employing district. Recommendations for addressing the concerns regarding governance of the IA were drafted and sent to task force board members as well as then Bloomfield Hills Superintendent Dr. Rob Glass. Every consortium board member is going to receive several supporting documents, including a copy of this presentation, some different resolutions that you may want to consider, as well as a lot of supporting documents to allow you to take a deeper dive into the information we're about to share with you. The International Academy is a magnet school. Magnet schools are defined actually in federal legislation. They are free public schools of choice that are either operated by one school district or a consortium of districts. In our case, the IA is operated by 13 Oakland County school districts. The magnet school model was begun back in the 1960s. It was originally designed to promote diversity. It has a special curriculum. It's something that is not available in the regular high school situation. A lot of people seem to think that IA is a charter school, and it is not. This chart will highlight the differences between magnet schools and charter schools. The most important thing that we want you to understand from this slide is that magnet schools require the same district administration and school board as regular public schools, and we must adhere to all state requirements.
I think one thing to note, the International Academy, it was started years ago as a result of a lot of the car companies who would have expatriates that were sent on assignment from their respective countries to the United States, and there was a need for them to explore or have sort of this IB education, and the need was there, and this is one of the reasons why the International Academy with its IB diploma program was opened years ago.
Several Oakland County Boards of Education entered into a consortium agreement to start this school. It is one school with 3 campuses. This slide highlights the different campuses. There are the Oakland campus in Bloomfield Hills, the West campus at Lakeland High School, and East within the Troy School District. Each participating district in this consortium owns one or more shares in the school. Each share is 5 seats per year. They are assigned to a specific campus. However, a district could hold shares in more than one campus. In 2018-19, the total enrollment of the school was a little over 1,500 students, and here's the breakdown. East and West campuses enroll school of choice students, either from non-consortium school districts or from children from other counties that surround our county. And the IA is a full international baccalaureate curriculum. Enrollment requires that every student work to earn both a regular high school diploma and an IB diploma. We put together a very small structural diagram for you so you can get an idea of the overview of how the school operates, with the Joint Steering Committee being the governing committee, then the principal, IB coordinators, service learning coordinators, and the 3 campuses. Several points of pride we'd like to highlight for the International Academy. It is consistently ranked as one of the top high schools in the United States and in Michigan. National merit recognition for 2018 class of 348 students. 57 students were identified as National Merit Scholars. That's 16% of that graduating class. And here's the breakdown. The ACT mean scores, SAT mean scores, and IB diploma success rate are highlighted next. The International Academy is the #1 IB diploma granting school in the United States. Our IB exam scores, out of 45 possible points, the average obtained by IA students was 31 points, while the world average was 29.8. That's a lot to be proud of. There are numerous extracurricular opportunities at the International Academy. However, students can also participate in activities in their home district. Examples of those would be athletics and marching band.
One thing I did want to add, I know in certain schools like Bloomfield Hills School District, in order to get into the International Academy, it's a lottery system. So students apply or families apply for a lottery. I know when my son went there a couple years ago, I know it was around 30, 35 students were taken out of a lottery of close to 300 students that applied.
And that's very typical, Paul, of most districts. It is a lottery system to get in. Let's switch now to talk about the governance structure of IA. Let's start by talking about what we know about local school districts, such as our own, where we're general power school districts and we are governed by a Board of Education. That Board of Education consists of 7 members that are elected by members of the public. And then we hire the superintendent, who is then responsible for the day-to-day operation of the district.
And I know that as a board, we set our board meetings, throughout the year, early in the year, and that's posted and have that and open to the public. So I know that's very critical as boards to make sure that we set that a year in advance so that the public know when our meetings are, when they're taking place, and if there's a special meeting, we have obligations to post them as well.
Absolutely. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the intermediate school district, because this model is going to become important in our later discussions. The intermediate school district is also governed by a Board of Education. It is 5 members. However, those 5 members are elected by the 28 Oakland County Boards of Education, not by the members of the public. The superintendent is hired by that Board of Education, and that superintendent is, again, responsible for the day-to-day operation of the intermediate school district.
So as you said, there's 28 schools that make up, but there's only 5 members of the 28 that are selected and representative of the 28 schools. So not every one of the schools has a member that's representative, and I believe it runs fairly quite well.
I think it runs beautifully. Yeah. In the International Academy, governance was delegated to the Joint Steering Committee. It was done in the consortium agreement that was approved way back in the 1990s by the Consortium Boards of Education. That Joint Steering Committee consists of 13 administrative representatives from the participating districts. The IA principal serves as the non-voting chairperson of the JSC, and the principal then is responsible for the day-to-day operation of all 3 campuses. However, there's also an associate principal at each campus. The Joint Steering Committee. Let's start to talk about what the Joint Steering Committee is supposed to do based on that consortium agreement. And you're going to hear us refer back to this consortium agreement throughout this presentation, because that is the document that is supposed to function as our board bylaws do in our local districts and describe exactly who does what and how it's supposed to be done. By definition, the Joint Steering Committee is a governing committee of the consortium. And again, as previously mentioned, it's composed of the administrative representatives from each of the districts. Each district designates their representative, and they're supposed to meet at least on a quarterly basis. Action of the Joint Steering Committee is supposed to be accomplished by a majority vote of its entire membership, unless otherwise provided in this agreement. So that means out of 13 districts, quorum would be 7 members.
So I know in Bloomfield Hills, our member of the Joint Steering Committee was our assistant superintendent in charge of learning services. So that's who we appointed, in any member of the 13. Generally it was someone in the past, it was an administrator in central office. That's what I understood, who was appointed in the past.
Okay. This chart is just going to show what's been happening as far as the meetings and those 4 meetings a year and quorum. So this is a snapshot from 2019 dating all the way back on a meeting minute review. We looked at the attendance that was recorded in those meeting minutes back to 2013. It's broken down by district, and as you can see, there are some issues here. For example, in 2017, we only found minutes for 1 meeting, and that was the December meeting. There is another one that was a March meeting that's alluded to in the previous minutes, but we never found any minutes to support that meeting ever happened. Either way, there were not meeting minutes available for all 4 meetings.
I think the message here, looking at this, is that there were some meetings where 4 were present, where to get a quorum of 13, you'd have to have obviously a majority. Where it seems from this looking back that it was quite difficult to get all 13 members at a significant number of the meetings. There were a few here and there, but getting everyone from all across Oakland County at these meetings, even though they're only 4 times a year, seemed quite difficult.
Why do board members need to care about this? Because the laws of the state of Michigan place the responsibility and the authority for governance of public schools on us, the elected boards of education. We're going to switch gears just a little bit from what's been happening in the Joint Steering Committee to some concerns that have been raised. These are allegations of Open Meeting Act violations. The allegations, as outlined in this complaint, are: back in the fall of 2014, the initial communication from the MSU First Amendment Law Clinic, and we'll further refer to them just as the clinic, with IA, its principals, member of the Joint Steering Committee, with that complaint that they were violating the Open Meetings Act. In 2015, the Joint Steering Committee responded by drafting amendments to the consortium agreement to change the JSC from a governing to a principal advisory committee. However, these proposed changes were never brought to all of the consortium boards. The meetings remained closed to the public, they weren't posted, and minutes were never made available to the public. In summer of 2018, the clinic learned that the meetings had never been open to the public. Fast forward to fall of last year, there was another communication sent from the clinic to the IA, the principal, members of the Joint Steering Committee, about continued non-compliance with OMA. Also in October of last year, the JSC responded by again drafting consortium agreement amendments that would once again propose changing the JSC from a governing to a principal advisory committee. Once again, those changes were never brought to the consortium boards. The meetings remained closed, they weren't posted, and minutes were not made available to the public. In December of 2018, the JSC meeting was finally open to the public for the first time. Clinic members came and spoke during public comment about the need to comply with the Open Meetings Act, or OMA. Also in December of last year, the clinic sent a letter to every consortium board member at the time and the superintendent. Keep in mind that new board members would have taken their seats in January of this year, so there may be some board members that are watching this that are not familiar with this past history. That letter outlined the Open Meetings Act violations and required corrective action. In June of this year, the clinic filed a complaint with the Michigan Attorney General against the International Academy, the Joint Steering Committee, the principal, as well as then Bloomfield Hills Superintendent Dr. Rob Glass. The quote from the complaint is that evidence obtained by the clinic which strongly suggests that the IA knowingly and intentionally violated OMA to keep the JSC meetings and decisions closed to the public, as had been its practice for more than a decade. The JSC obtained the clinic obtained JSC meetings minutes via FOIA. Sorry about that. Alleged in the complaint. Between 2014 and 2018, quorums were not present at 90% of the JSC meetings. Some of the meetings had as few as only 2 to 4 members in attendance. Substantive issues were taking place at those meetings. Decisions which lacked a quorum are invalid, and substantive fiscal and policy-making decisions made at 90% of the meetings held in the last 5 years are therefore invalid. And another quote from the complaint. The vast majority of these poorly attended meetings were held after the clinic notified the IA and its JSC of OMA violations in fall 2014. Apparently little to nothing was done over the years to ensure a quorum would be present for meetings to bring the JSC into OMA compliance. And again, we're just going to show you this slide so that you can look again at the meeting attendance and connect the dots between the complaint and what we found in the meeting minutes. Now, the current status of the Attorney General complaint. Meetings for all of the meeting minutes for the Joint Steering Committee since 2004 have been posted to IA's website. We have been advised that all minutes have been located, are posted. However, there are no minutes for 2007, 2008, 2009 Joint Steering Committee meetings. Apparently, there are no 2006 minutes. We're not sure because the 2006 link takes you to 2004 minutes. There are minutes that are, again, missing for other dates, such as October of 2018 and March of 2017. The minutes show quorum issues dating back 15 years, all the way to the 2004-2005 meetings. The clinic has also raised concerns regarding a long history of the JSC voting by email. The clinic may file an amendment to the complaint to obtain access to attachments to these meeting minutes. The clinic contends that you cannot tell really what happened in a meeting without those attachments. And some examples of that would be the budgets, contracts, or other documents that have been referenced in the minutes. OMA requires that the minutes contain a statement of the time, date, and place of a meeting, the members present as well as those absent, a record of any decisions made at the meeting, and a record of all roll call votes, and an explanation for the purposes of a closed session. However, OMA does not prohibit more detailed minutes of its public meetings. The clinic may file suit in Oakland Circuit Court if the Attorney General does not address the complaint. The complainants in the Attorney General complaint scheduled a meeting with Senator Rosemary Bayer back in July. The meeting was attended by the clinic director, the community clients, and one of the task force board members. Senator Bayer was reached out to because she is a senator over the area covered by the consortium, and she's part of a caucus working on a package of bills related to charter schools to ensure transparency and accountability of all publicly funded schools. Senator Bayer's commented that governance model is failed and it needs to be fixed. She agreed with the clinic attorney comment that the longevity of this is astounding. She commented on the need to figure out steps forward. She listened intently, and she is very supportive of the task force recommendation that we'll get to shortly, but she will contact the Attorney General to move this along. Clinic clients have also requested meetings with 2 other legislators, and that meeting happened last week with Representative Manoogian and Representative Bolden.
And there were also representatives from McMorrow's office that was there as well. And yeah, similar to that meeting, we talked about the need for governance. They talked about, they went into some of the things that, you brought up here in the slides. They had, updated information regarding the Attorney General complaint. We talked about that, and we agreed too that we need to work on governance, and that's why I set up this task force to work on governance going forward and make sure some of the things that happened in the past in terms of governance, doesn't happen going forward. So that was one of the things, that we talked about, and that's again, one of the main reasons, that we're presenting today to kind of look at what's happened in the past and try to work on a governance model going forward.
Okay. Let's talk about a Joint Steering Committee special meeting. It was held on July 31st of this year. It was held at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to ensure quorum. The agenda you'll see on your screen now. The meeting only lasted 22 minutes, and that included public comment. It was attended by 11 of the 13 districts. Interestingly, Joint Steering Member asked about why they were reviewing the budget at the end of July, and the response from another committee member was to catch up. A member questioned why the superintendents should be attending these Joint Steering Committee meetings instead of designating their high school assistant principal to the governing board. The JSC at that meeting passed a resolution. However, the resolution does not address the chronic quorum issues. We also question how this resolution will address OMA compliance for approval and posting of minutes. The minutes show that it has long been the JSC's practice, again, to vote to approve minutes via email. There are a couple of good examples that we're going to show you on your screen now where they were approving minutes from a year prior. And that occurred in 2016 and 2014. There are several other examples in those meeting minutes. We're just highlighting a couple for you. OMA requirements are that proposed meeting minutes must be available for public inspection within 8 business days after a meeting. Minutes must be approved at the next meeting, and approved minutes must be available within 5 business days after the meeting at which they were approved. Corrections to the minutes must be made no later than the next meeting, and then must be available no later than the meeting after the correction approval. And corrected minutes must show both the original entry and the correction via strike-through. There are penalties for violating the Open Meetings Act, and a lot of people are not aware of what those penalties are. So any person, including the state attorney general or a local prosecuting attorney, can commence a lawsuit to compel compliance in local circuit court. If successful in obtaining an injunction, the person is entitled to recover court costs and actual attorney fees. And there are criminal penalties, and those are outlined on your screen. We're going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about the finances of the IA, which is another thing the task force took some time to look into. Mm-hmm. Let's first explain how IA is funded. The sending district counts their IA students on count day. They collect the foundation allowance from the state, and then they pay that in tuition to the fiscal agent that accepts their students. The consortium agreement requires the Joint Steering Committee to set tuition rate annually. They use currently an equity of effort model. The simple explanation for that is it's the tuition up to the sending district's foundation allowance, and when applicable, any hold harmless money remains with the sending district, and the tuition is paid in installments. The equity of effort model is important because every district in the state of Michigan is funded slightly differently, and that's something that's done via the legislature, that we have no control over it. Each of the sending districts may contribute staff, services, or supplies, or even capital equipment as credit against the per pupil tuition charge for their enrolled students. The participating districts send certified staff to IA. Those staff members do remain employees of the sending district and members of their home district's bargaining unit. The OCMA fiscal agent, Bloomfield Hills, employs the principal, and the fiscal agent for each campus then employs the assistant principal and the non-certified staff working at that campus.
It should be interesting to note when you say the Oakmont campus with a fiscal agent. So the only thing that we do as fiscal agent is we own the building, so we're the landlord. Mm-hmm. So Bloomfield Hills is not in charge of the International Academy Oakmont program. we're one of, as indicated earlier, several districts. The only connection is that we're the fiscal agent just because we own the building and we rent it out to the International Academy.
Absolutely. That's, I think, a very important distinction to make, is that the East Campus, Troy is the fiscal agent, you are the fiscal agent for the Central Campus, and West has Huron Valley as their fiscal agent. And again, it's just for paying bills and for operating as the landlord.
Yep.
As we take a little deeper dive into the finances, we're going to refer back again to that consortium agreement. There is supposed to be a personnel subcommittee as well as a budget subcommittee. And those are important because, again, each one of the districts has a say in this. The school is not run by any one district, it's run by 13 districts.
Correct. It's not run by Bloomfield Hills, it's run by 13 districts. And based on the amount of shares, for an example, Bloomfield Hills has a certain amount of shares allocated, so does Birmingham, so does West Bloomfield. So again, it's not Bloomfield Hills School, it's a school run by 13 separate that agreed in this consortium agreement.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about the budget subcommittee. It shall consist of the business managers or other comparable administrative staff members from each one of the 13 participating districts. They are required to meet at least once a year. They are supposed to, on an ongoing basis, review in advance and ongoing the operating and capital outlay budgets and recommend amendments, revisions, or changes to the Joint Steering Committee and to the participating district superintendents. They are supposed to also periodically report on the status of those budgets, so mid-year reports, budget amendments, and they're supposed to identify when expenses of the cooperative program are or may potentially exceed the revenue and immediately report this information to both the JSC and to the district superintendents. And that report should also include a recommendation for eliminating a deficit.
Correct. So as indicated earlier, it's the job of the Joint Steering Committee or the governing body to approve the budget. It's not the role of the fiscal agent
That
to
is
approve
correct.
the budget. It's the role of the Joint Steering Committee or whoever is the governing body to approve that budget.
To approve it and monitor it.
Correct.
So again, continuing in that consortium agreement, the JSC shall adopt an operating budget for each campus no later than March 31st. However, when we looked through all of the JSC meeting minutes, we found prior to July 31st of this year, the most recent budget discussion by the JSC was December 4th of 2012, with a subsequent approval of the 2013-14 budget at the February of 2013 JSC meeting. Aside from possible tuition increases discussed in October of 2018's JSC meeting, there's no mention of budget at those meetings between June of 2013 and June of 2019. No discussion of enrollment projections at the March, June, or even the July of this year JSC meetings. The OCMA Budget Subcommittee recommendations were made in December of last year. There was no evidence of any further discussion after LEA lotteries, enrollment projections, or the results of the February and May math placement tests, and no discussion of the potential impact of the state school aid fund budget recommendations on the budget proposed by the Budget Subcommittee.
And also on that, the one thing is I don't think there's been any discussion regarding a capital fund for any improvements in the building outside of whether it's new equipment for bands, new equipment, or things in terms of furniture inside the school. I don't think there was anything that was discussed regarding setting aside or trying to get some sort of capital improvement.
Not at the OCMA campus.
Okay.
We're going to take a little deeper
Yep.
dive into that in just a minute. Let's go through some of the different things we found when we started reviewing the IA budgets. Our goal was to provide the consortium boards with a snapshot of the financial picture of the school. Our first step was to try to find that JSC approved 3-campus budget. It's not posted to the IA website, and the IA website's Budget and Transparency tab takes you to the Troy District's website. A JSC approved budget was not found on any of the 3 fiscal agent websites. Our second step, we sought the budget through the principal, Principal Gibson, and we were referred to each of the fiscal agents, and we're going to go into that a little bit more on the next slide. Our third step was we did obtain the OCMA campus budget from the OCMA fiscal agent website, Bloomfield Hills. We also then requested very specific data from East and West campus fiscal agents, including the budget for their campuses from 18-19 school year and any budget amendments made throughout that year, the IA budget for all campuses for the upcoming 2019-20 school year, and for both budgets, please include the approval date and identify the public body that approved the budget and or amendment. And again, let's tie that back to what the consortium agreement said is supposed to happen. So let's see what we found. In that email communication with the principal, the response was that each campus has its own fiscal agent, and as such, that fiscal agent is responsible for reporting the IA budget. Because the IA budget is a component of the district budget, that Board of Education approves it. The subcommittee of business managers for the Okma campus met on December 12th to discuss this year's budget and make adjustments. At the Bloomfield Hills Board meeting last week, this was back in June, the budget was approved. And we want to highlight that while the JSC is authorized to approve and adopt a budget, it is not required to do so. However, that statement is very contrary to what is in that consortium agreement. A couple of other things that were mentioned in that email. The Fiscal Agent's Board of Education approval of the budget ensures that it occurs in an open meeting with the appropriate minutes and attachments. And this ties us back to the OMA complaint. And that was the first time that there was talk of having the Joint Steering Committee look at the upcoming year's budget. My question once I got that email back, Paul, was what about the 3 business managers from the East and West campuses? They never met. They only had 10 of the 13 meeting to discuss tuition and set the budget. And each one of these is then, we realize, is operating as a silo. Each campus is totally a silo instead of one school. We found that a joint steering committee tri-campus budget showing all IA revenue, expenditures, and a fund balance does not exist. Each campus handles their budget also very differently. The costs that are shared by all 3 campuses are divided and shared by each campus. Examples of that would be the principal, the IB coordinator, salary and benefits, the IB advanced ed fees, things like that. The Okma budget is available on the Bloomfield Health website, and we'll get into each one of those in just a little bit. Okma campus is treated as a special fund. However, that budget has no line item for capital expenditures such as technology, basic classroom science equipment, and furniture. The IA East budget is embedded in the Troy District's general fund budget. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that in just a minute. We requested that 2019-2020 budget that was approved by the Troy Board of Education, and as of July 15th, even though it had been approved a month earlier, it was not provided to us. They couldn't provide it. The IA West budget is considered a special revenue fund, and so all that we see there are the total revenue and expenditures on the website. We don't get a breakdown as to how that money is being spent. However, they did provide us with a 2018-19 end-of-year revenue and expenditures, and again, we're going to take a little deeper dive into that in just a minute. Audited data was reviewed from 2 of the 3 fiscal agent websites, and again, we're going to show you some of that, but that's obviously only Okma and West because, again, the Troy budget, the East budget, is part of the general fund, so it can't be broken out. Let's talk a little bit about what we received from IA East, and you'll see we got 3 pages with a whole lot of numbers. It's expenditures only. This arrow on the bottom will become important on the next slide. We'll clarify because we don't expect anybody to try to read this. What we received are these 3 pages of expenditures, but no revenue data was provided at all. And this information is not publicly available on IA or the Troy District's websites. When providing this data, again, they did talk about the fact that it is part of their general fund budget and it's not standalone. That arrow on the first page, we're going to highlight a little bit better now because this is the bottom line as to how they spent their money. And they did end up with a little bit of money that was available and budgeted to be spent, but that wasn't spent, just under $94,000. However, again, we have no idea what the revenue was, so we have no idea what the status of this campus is. If it's stable, if it's profitable, if it's operating at a deficit, we have no idea. We did ask some questions of the assistant superintendent for the Troy district. And again, we asked, is there a general fund, is there a fund balance? Do they have any pot of dollars that are set aside? And again, it's part of their general fund. There's no separate fund balance. And again, they don't pool any resources with any of the other two campuses. So as one school, each one is again operating very much in silos. And they did confirm, though, that they do share those costs for the things like the IB coordinator and the principal, and they do not charge facility rental to the IA. Let's skip over to the West side now. When we requested the West budget, we got 5 pages of data. They provided us with budget versus year-end actual revenue and expenditures on these 5 pages. And the 2019-2020 budget resolution that was approved by the Huron Valley Board of Education. If you look at those 2 arrows at the top and center of your screen and at the bottom right, that information then was elaborated on, because again, we're not expecting you to be able to read it on the screen. And we put it down in the bottom left corner of the screen. If we look at the budgeted revenue versus expenses, they were projecting a $195,000 surplus at the end of the year. I want to be sure that I mention at this point that there was a budget amendment on June 17th that maintained that projection. 2 weeks later, by June 30th, we find that the actual revenue versus expenses showed a $205,000 deficit. That's a $400,000 spread on a $2.6 million budget, which is very concerning. We went back through, again, the audited financials and started looking at the fund balance and the original budgets when they amended the budgets. We also tried to plug in some of the total campus enrollment so we could see what impact, because your enrollment has a significant impact on your revenue, and then it will also then require adjustments to your expenditures based on the available revenue. If we look in the center of the screen, you'll see under expenditures for the original budget for the 2019-2020 school year, you'll see a little asterisk that's highlighted in yellow. The reason we highlighted that, if you follow down to the bottom, when the Joint Steering Committee looked at the budget, they had a different number for expenditures than what was approved by the local district board just a month earlier. Again, they've got some fund balance, so that's great. But we also have a $200,000 deficit from last year, or at least it's projecting that way. But with the enrollment from last year, when they only were at a $28,000 deficit, the enrollment was very stable. So why all of a sudden is there a $200,000 fund deficit, spending deficit? Let's shift gears to the OCMA budget. And it was really nice to see a budget where you can actually see what is allocated for revenue as well as expenditures. And this budget is posted to the fiscal agency, the Bloomfield Hills website, under Budget and Transparency Reporting. You can find it there. It was approved by your board back in June. The OCMA budget, again, does not have a budget line item for capital expenditures. You'll see exactly how they allocate money. I do want to point out one thing that was a question that I had that was quickly answered for me. Up at the top under revenue for local sources, there's about $300,000 of local revenue. That is offset further down about the lower third of the screen where it says community service expenditures, and that is offset again around $300,000. IA students are all required to take 6 enrichments during the course of their career at the school. Those are paid for by the parents, and there's a cost obviously to put those on. That's the revenue and that's the expenditures that are tied to the enrichments. As you'll see at the bottom, if you look at it here and just look at only the 2019-20, it's not a bad snapshot. They do run a deficit in their budget of about $128,000. But it's when you look at the bigger picture, and that's what's missing from a lot of this, and this is our point. When we start looking at the fund balance history and the last 6 years, they started out with $2.2 million back in 2012, 2013 in fund balance. That is now projected by the end of this year to be only less than $200,000. And so they're outspending their revenue by a significant amount. Now, we're not standing here saying that they shouldn't spend down some of that fund balance. A 36% fund balance is a lot. However, now it's down to only 3.5% or less, and you need fund balance to be able to adapt when enrollment changes cause you to take in less revenue than anticipated. And IA has a unique problem in that because it's a full IB curriculum, if a student moves out of the district or moves out of the state or the country midway through their high school career, you can't backfill those like you do in a normal school. So that revenue is then lost. So we need to have fund balance and maintain a healthy fund balance, not only for those enrollment problems, but again, we've got to meet the capital needs of this school. Technology has to be refreshed, furniture needs to be refreshed, and basic equipment such as science equipment must be purchased.
And I don't think there's anything also in the consortium agreement as written if they went below, let's say to a negative fund balance and they needed to deep in somewhere, like where would those funds come from? So that's why we do need to take a look at both the agreement and make sure the governance model is in place, to make sure that these questions can get answered.
Absolutely, and it's really important that we have all 13 districts and all 13 district business managers at that table having those discussions. Again, this is not just the fiscal agent's problem to manage this. This is something that comes back to all 13 members of this consortium. And again, let's get back to the discussion about these capital needs. Every school has capital needs, but IA does not have the ability to seek a bond for things like the technology and basic classroom equipment. They're part of a consortium. It's not a standalone district. IA has adapted very well, surprisingly, by seeking donations from IA parents and the community at large. There have been furniture campaigns. There was a tri-campus gala back in 2014 to support the science department. On the PTAIA website for just this spring, they had a fundraising campaign for basic science equipment that is either broken or missing from these classrooms. The IA Okma website also put out a big thank you to the Community Housing Network. And it's wonderful that these folks stepped forward and provided IA with things like podiums, bulletin boards, chairs, tables, teacher desks, all sorts of things. But again, this is a community organization that's supposed to be supporting homeless people, not our schools. This is the responsibility of our schools to make sure that we have the things we need for our kids. The JSC's governance model isn't working. The JSC now has these legal issues in this OMA complaint for the years of OMA violations. The JSC has rarely had a quorum over at least the past decade. Quorum problems, again, were evident back in 2004 and 2005. Every district has had a representative that has missed multiple meetings. We're not pointing the finger. We're all responsible for this. Between the March and June of 2019 JSC meetings, the Joint Steering Committee could not assemble a 6-member subcommittee to review its consortium agreement. Only 4 members stepped up, and 3 of those are from the fiscal agent districts. The March and June 2019 JSC meetings focused exclusively on the resolution for changes to this consortium agreement, OMA compliance, and the AG complaint. They didn't include any information on important school governance issues. Those things should be talked about at every meeting. Those include student achievement, the new mental health curriculum, the JSC required budget approval, capital needs, fund balance, enrollment staffing, the spring advanced ed visit, etc. While it is the statutory responsibility of the boards of education to govern our schools, way back in the 1990s, the boards delegated the responsibility to the JSC, but they never ensured that it was occurring. The JSC admittedly has never followed the consortium agreement. One of the longtime JSC members is repeatedly quoted in a recorded interview. We really didn't follow that document that closely. We want to be very clear on the point that we are not intending to change the language to make it less of a governance body. The point was to adjust the document to reflect what we really have always done since the beginning of it. And again, that any revision to the consortium agreement would have to provide a governance board because the JSC was clearly set up as a governing body. This person also said that this attorney, and we're not naming names, provided the district with different options for addressing the OMA issues, but they were ultimately rejected. And the person that made these statements didn't understand the role of JSC when he sat on it. They held that oversight and decisions involving the IA were made by the member school boards, not the JSC. And like you could change the language, but you'd probably have to create some other kind of governance board. We are supposed to be a board superintendent team. Before engaging an attorney, the boards of education and superintendents should be working together as a team to determine how to govern the IA with fidelity. However, for the third time in 5 years, the JSC has hired an attorney to draft changes to the agreement. In 2015 and 2018, as we've previously mentioned, they proposed to downgrade the JSC to an advisory committee, and a summary of those changes in those supplemental documents is provided to you. Since 2014, thousands of dollars have been spent on attorney fees, reviewing and drafting changes that were never even brought to all of the boards. Between a couple of different law firms, approximately 30 hours just on OMA-related issues involving the IA. And the legal bills are included in the Attorney General's complaint exhibits. The JSC can recommend. However, the JSC lacks the authority to approve any changes to the consortium agreement. Any changes to that agreement require the approval of the consortium boards of education. So in summary, the IA is a gem. It has outstanding students and outstanding staff. It is a public magnet school. Magnet schools must be operated and overseen the same as our LEA districts, and that is in our Michigan Law 380.11a, public schools shall be governed by a school board. The boards, however, back in the 1990s, delegated their governance responsibility to the JSC. There is plenty of evidence that the JSC administrative governance model is not working. We need to stay in our respective lanes. Boards govern and superintendents operate. The Michigan Association of School Boards outlines the roles and responsibility of school board members. And these are outlined here on this slide. But with effective board and superintendent teams, each side clearly understands the roles and responsibilities. We, as boards of education members, are supposed to be setting goals, policy, designating and evaluating our leader of the school. We're supposed to be looking at the budget, curriculum, staffing and appraisal, and facilities.
And that's in essence what the JSC, what the boards designated the JSC to be doing over the course of the last decade, setting goals, policy, looking at budget, reviewing curriculum, staffing and appraisal, facilities, and that's, as you indicated, what's been lacking.
It's lacking, absolutely. But the essence of governance is for us, the school board members, to take full and final local accountability for the performance of the district or the school. We have recommendations for you. There is an urgent need to establish governance of the IA with fidelity. Neither the JSC nor 13 consortium boards of 7 members can effectively govern this school. We recommend following the Oakland Schools model by establishing a 5-member IA board. Those board members, just like our intermediate school district, would be elected from the 13 consortium districts boards with not more than 1 board member per consortium district. That IA board then would provide the accountability, transparency, and compliance with both the law and the consortium agreement, and it would ensure regular reporting to all 13 consortium boards.
The way it would be set up, the 5 members, would volunteer to run and be elected to be on this board. So the people that obviously would volunteer to do this role would be vested, would know when the meeting schedule would be, and most likely would be able to attend. So there would be no issue if we had the 5-member board. We envision there would be no issue getting a quorum, which has been the major problem of having all 13 represented, trying to get that quorum. And as you indicated earlier, if you don't have a quorum, anything that gets decided upon becomes invalid without a quorum, and that's been the problem. And that's, one of the reasons why, this has been looked upon as lack of governance in the past.
Our second recommendation is to maintain the JSC, but give them what they've asked for. Change their role to advisory. They proposed it twice in 2015 and 2018. They're currently also continuing to, again, propose changes to the consortium agreement. We think it's important to keep superintendents on the Joint Steering Committee because they provide the expert guidance on administrative issues. We cannot have assistant principals or lower level administrators without the ability to really make decisions and the understanding of the decisions and the importance of those deeper dives that, again, have not been occurring. We also recommend that all 13 consortium superintendents remain on the advisory committee because every district needs to have a seat at the table. But again, if they're advisory, quorum isn't an issue. However, home district administration is really important because as we spoke about very early in the presentation, the staff members are members of that home district bargaining unit. And those students remain your students. So if there's any student discipline issues, any enrollment issues, whatever it might be that are tied to your district, your superintendent has a seat at that table to come and help make those decisions for your district.
And then some of the issues that happened in the past where they didn't have a quorum or they were voting by email, if they're just obviously an advisory board reporting into a governing board of 5, then some of those, internal decisions that they wanted to do, can happen. And you don't have to worry about the OMA violations. If the governing board on top is complying with all the OMA requirements, then how it was operating in the past would not be, such an issue, what we're recommending.
Absolutely. The third thing that we recommend is to maintain the personnel and budget subcommittees, and again, each with 13 members that would meet to discuss all the budget issues that should be going on, again, with 13 members, not just 10, because again, the IA staff are employed by the participating districts, so we need those personnel managers there. They're part of the bargaining units in each one of the districts, as well as the expert financial management of the budget and any other financial language in the consortium agreement. We want to have the right people at the table that are going to give the best guidance for the success for the school long term.
And this recommendation structure would give, again, those 13, those subcommittees a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they want to handle the meeting, whether it's Zoom or again, via email. It can give them more flexibility being in 13 different locations.
Absolutely. Now, our second recommendation, and slightly separate from that, is that we, as consortium boards of education, we need an attorney. We need an attorney to represent us on the legal matters resulting from the past governance of the IA, which is currently the Attorney General complaint, but that could end up in the circuit court if this is not resolved quickly. We also need to make sure that all of our districts are represented without conflict of interest. We may also need that attorney to establish a functional governance structure, ensuring compliance with laws, and review and update all areas of our consortium agreement to align and make sure that we are in compliance with all of the laws, and then submit it to all the consortium boards for approval. We have an ask. We have an ask of each one of the boards of education. We ask that you collaborate with us and support our work. We ask you to help us fix a broken system to ensure transparency and accountability. Proper governance will provide a solid path forward for the IA. We ask you to delegate a board member from each one of the districts to serve as a primary task force contact/communication person. We ask every consortium board of education to pass a resolution that will provide us with clear direction regarding proposed amendments to the consortium agreement. We offer 3 resolution options for your consideration. Our first would be our recommendation to support our recommendation to establish a governing body by a board that would also change the JSC to an advisory committee. The second option, the second resolution proposed, is just maintain the status quo with the current JSC governance of 13 administrators, realizing that that's not going to change anything, and that's not going to fix this problem. The third potential option is to continue to delegate governance to the JSC, but Let the JSC's 4 members that have stepped up determine how exactly to change the consortium agreement and how they might operate. But again, given the fact that they could only get 4 members, they weren't even able to get 6, there are a lot of concerns about moving forward with that pathway. We're going to ask each one of the boards to allocate $500 per share that you have in the IA for these legal expenses. The cost will be spread out among all 13, and it will be a lot less than each one of the districts having to go and hire an attorney themselves. We cannot take any money out of this school for legal representation. We need to have the consortium step up and allocate some money. Our goal for completion of all of this, and again, if we hope that you'll support our recommendation, is to get a board in place by December 31st of this year. And in order for us to do that, we need all of our boards to pass the resolution and allocate funds by the middle of September. Again, we're going to ask you, why should you care about all of this? Michigan law requires that the governance of all public schools, and that includes the programs and magnet schools that we operate, by a board of education. It's our job to do this. If we look to the future, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And we can't go back and we can't change what happened already, but we can start where we are and we can change the ending. If you have any questions, please reach out to one of the task force board members. The emails are provided for you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.